My biological mom manipulated her way into my life, just to rob my adoptive parents blind. So I kicked her out and watched her life implode. 6 months later, she returned pleading forgiveness, and I turned my back forever. My parents used to make fun of me for being adopted. You see, I was 6 when I entered into their family, so by the time I turned 10, I had a lot of questions about where I came from. But instead of lying or even sugarcoating the truth, they told me I was adopted. They then followed up about how I was their miracle child, because they never thought the universe would give them the chance to raise such an amazing son like me. That's when the jokes started coming up. They'd laugh about how I had my birth mom's snoring gene, or her terrible sense of direction. So that's how any feeling that I was unwanted completely washed away. They were honestly the best parents I could have asked for, biological or otherwise. But by the time I turned 16, I developed this deep desire to know my roots, and of course, to meet my mother. Over the span of a few months, it turned into a yearning feeling. It was the first time I had ever understood the phrase, "a piece of me was missing." And I guess my parents noticed, because it was around this time that the jokes stopped. Sometimes I'd even try to spark them up again, only for them to quickly change topics, or look really uncomfortable. Well, I loved my parents, and the last thing I wanted was for them to think they weren't good enough. So I basically gaslit myself into being grateful for what I had. This plan worked until I turned 18, because that's when my parents sat me down at the kitchen table with an already opened envelope in their hand. I figured it was a college acceptance letter. "This came for you when you were born," my dad said. My mom chimed in, "Your birth mom left it at the adoption agency. We weren't allowed to give it to you until you turned 18. A cold dread seeped into my chest. The handwriting was barely legible, faded from the decade it had spent folded up. In it, I could make out a line that said, "I did what I had to do," as well as an address to somewhere about 40 miles away. My parents both stared at me, waiting for my reaction. "Thanks," was the only word I managed to make out, before trudging up the stairs and crying into my pillow. Suddenly, I was recalling memories I didn't even know I had. The way my mom's hand let go of mine at the center. The recurring feeling of a deep heaviness that haunted every night I slept without a family. And now I had the chance to see her again. I couldn't figure out if it was a blessing or a curse. I ended up crying myself to sleep that night, but when I woke up, I didn't achieve the clarity I'd hoped for. Instead, my mind was fogged up with a deep sense of unease. I stared at the letter once again. F it, I thought. And that's how I spent the morning driving to see my mother for the first time in 12 years. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe a cartoonish feeling of instant connection, or a deep sense of satisfaction. Instead, it was like looking at a stranger. I knew it was her, because she had the same light green eyes as me, the same obscenely odd-shaped earlobes. I sat down, and she served me some stale coffee. "You're my mother!" I wanted to blurt out, but instead, I just asked to get some pancakes. She nodded and walked away, like I was just another customer. While I waited, I bit my nails down to the nail beds. I figured that maybe it was like exposure therapy, and I didn't have to talk straight away. So the next day, I came back with every intention of speaking to her, but I didn't, because she ended up speaking to me. Surprisingly, our conversation flowed so naturally that she even took a work break to yap together. In just 30 minutes, we hopped from the topic of politics, to our favorite color, to our friend's drama, to school. It was like I had known her all along. I was just about to break the news to her when she asked me the question. "Hey, this is weird, but I just have this feeling like we're really similar." "Me too! And I have the answer!" I was so excited to tell my mom that she was, well, my mom, but then she spoke again. "Usually, I only feel this way with parents who have given their kids up for adoption, have you?" It was so far from what I had expected her to say that I just froze, and in a moment of panic I nodded. "I knew it!" she exclaimed, like she had just won a game show. I smiled awkwardly, and she kept going. "You know, people act like it's this big heartbreaking thing, but honestly, I felt more relief than guilt." She took my silence as an invitation to continue. "I know this sounds bad, but I never saw it as a person. It was just this screaming consequence." She then laughed so hard that she slapped her knee until it turned red. I felt bile rise up in my throat. "So, did you leave a letter for your child?" I asked, wanting to find out more. "Yeah, but only because I knew he'd never actually come." By this point, I regretted ever wanting a family outside of mine. I put the letter on the table, watched her face drain of color, and walked out. I never even told my parents about it, but the next day, she called them in tears. But she wasn't for me. She was looking for money, her voice honeyed and desperate according to my dad's grim retelling. 3 days later, my dad discovered someone had applied for 3 credit cards and a personal loan in his name. The loan had already been approved for $15,000, and the money withdrawn vanished like morning mist. My mom's medical insurance had been used for prescriptions none of us had ever taken, bottles of painkillers and anxiety medication filled at pharmacies we'd never visited. "This is identity theft," I said, watching my dad on the phone with the credit card company, his face growing redder with each passing minute. "We need to file a police report." My mom wrung her hands, the silver rings on her fingers clicking together nervously. "Let's just talk to her first. Maybe there's an explanation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing, the disbelief making my voice rise. "Mom, she's stealing from you. She's using you. She's troubled," my mom insisted. her eyes pleading. And she's still, don't say she's family. I cut her off, the words sharper than I intended. She's not. You're my family. My dad hung up the phone with a forceful click. They're freezing the accounts and investigating. We need to contact the other credit bureaus and put a fraud alert on our credit reports. We spent the whole weekend making calls, filling out forms, and placing security freezes on their credit. My parents looked exhausted, defeated, the dark circles under their eyes like bruises. I'd never seen them like this before, these pillars of strength suddenly looking so vulnerable. I'm sorry, I said Sunday night, as we sat around the kitchen table, the same table where they'd given me the letter that started this whole mess. This is all my fault. If I hadn't gone looking for her— No, my dad interrupted firmly, reaching across to grip my shoulder. You have nothing to apologize for. You deserve to know where you came from. This is on her, not you. My mom nodded in agreement, but I could see the hurt in her eyes, not because of what I'd done, but because of what my birth mother had become. This woman who'd given birth to me, but shared none of the values my parents had instilled. 3 days later, she showed up at our house unannounced. I was home from college for the evening to help my parents organize their financial documents, the dining room table covered in papers and forms. When the doorbell rang, my dad answered it, his shoulders squaring as he recognized who stood on our porch. You need to leave, I heard him say, his voice unusually stern, the same voice he'd used when I was 16 and came home hammered from a party. I just want to talk, she replied, her voice carrying that same false sweetness I'd heard at the diner. I brought something for all of you. I peered around the corner and saw her holding a gift basket filled with cheap wine and crackers, the cellophane wrapper crinkling in her nervous grip. We know what you've been doing, my dad said. The credit cards, the loan, the stolen laptop. We have you on camera breaking into our house. She laughed, but it sounded hollow, like an empty room. Breaking in? I had a key. Your wife gave it to me. My mom appeared beside my dad, her face pale but determined. I gave you that key for emergencies, not to steal from us. Steal? She looked offended, one hand pressed dramatically to her chest. I was just borrowing things. I was going to pay you back once I got back on my feet. With what money? I asked, stepping into view, the sight of her standing in our doorway making my skin crawl. The money you stole from us? Her eyes narrowed when she saw me, something cold and calculating replacing the fake warmth. You turned them against me, didn't you? After everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Abandoned me? Called me a screaming consequence? Stolen from the only parents who ever loved me? She pushed past my dad and entered the house uninvited, the scent of her perfume, too sweet, too strong, filling the entryway. I gave you life. I carried you for 9 months. Do you know what that did to my body? To my life? We've called the police, my dad lied, though I could see his hand inching toward his phone. They're on their way. Go ahead, she sneered, tossing the gift basket onto the couch where it landed with a dull thud. I'll tell them how you've been giving me money voluntarily, how you invited me into your lives, how your son has been harassing me. She walked around our living room, picking up photos, examining them like she was appraising their value, her fingernails clicking against the glass frames. Such a perfect little family you have here. Did you ever tell him why you couldn't have children of your own? My parents exchanged a look I couldn't interpret, something private passing between them that made my stomach twist. That's enough, my dad said firmly. You need to leave now. She ignored him, turning to me instead, her eyes, my eyes, glittering with malice. Did they tell you they tried for years? That they spent their life savings on fertility treatments that failed? That they were desperate for any child, even someone else's unwanted baby? Stop it, my mom whispered, the color draining from her face. They weren't your first choice, she continued, her voice dripping with venom. They were just the ones willing to take damaged goods. Something in me snapped, a hot rush of anger flooding my veins. Get out, I said, my voice shaking. Get out of our house. She laughed again, the sound like breaking glass. Your house? This isn't your house. You're just as much an outsider here as I am. My dad stepped between us, his back straight as a rod. That's where you're wrong. He is our son in every way that matters. You're nothing but a thief and a liar. Her face contorted with rage, transforming those familiar features into something monstrous. She grabbed a framed photo of me and my parents from the mantel and hurled it against the wall. Glass shattered across the hardwood floor, the sound like ice breaking on a frozen lake. You owe me, she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. All of you! You think you can just take my child and not pay for it? They didn't take me, I said, suddenly calm in the face of her chaos, a strange clarity washing over me. You gave me up. You left me, and thank God you did, because they're 1,000 times the parent you could ever be. She lunged toward me, but my dad caught her arm. She twisted free and slapped me hard across the face, the sting bringing tears to my eyes, but I didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared back at her with a pity that seemed to enrage her further. Don't you ever touch my son again, my mom said, her voice deadly quiet as she stepped between us, 5'4" of pure maternal fury. My birth mother stared at her, then at me, then back at her, something shifting in her expression as she realized she was outmatched. Fine, she said finally, smoothing her shirt with trembling hands. Keep your precious family, but this isn't over. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell from the wall, the frame cracking on impact. We stood in silence for a long moment, the only sound our collective breathing. My cheek throbbed where she'd hit me, the skin hot to the touch. Are you okay? My mom asked, gently touching my face, her cool fingers soothing against the forming bruise. I nodded. I'm fine, but we need to do something. She's not going to stop. My dad was already on the phone, his voice steady and determined. Yes, I'd like to speak to someone about filing a restraining order. The next morning, I went to the courthouse with my parents. We filed for a temporary restraining order based on the assault and the break-ins, the fluorescent lights of the government building making everyone look sickly and tired. The judge granted it immediately, barely looking up from the paperwork. This will keep her away for now, the clerk explained as she handed us the paperwork, her expression sympathetic. But you'll need to come back for the hearing in 2 weeks to make it permanent. On the way home, my dad asked, do you think we should press charges for the identity theft? I thought about it, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood pass by through the car window. Let's wait, see if the restraining order works first. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. Something about the look in her eyes when she left told me she wasn't done with us, that this was just the opening act in whatever drama she was determined to stage. For the next few days, things were quiet, too quiet, like the stillness before a storm. I stayed at home instead of going back to my dorm, helping my parents install a real security system with cameras covering every entrance, the house now resembling a fortress more than a home. You should go back to school, my mom insisted, as we sat at the kitchen table eating takeout Chinese food, neither of them having the energy to cook. We'll be fine. I'll go back tomorrow, I promised, though I had no intention of leaving them alone, not with the threat of her return hanging over us like a shadow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what my birth mother had said about my parents being desperate for any child. I knew she was trying to hurt me, but was there truth in it? Had I really been damaged goods? The thought circled my mind like a vulture. Around midnight, I went downstairs for water and found my dad sitting in the dark living room, the glow from the security system's monitor casting his face in an eerie blue light. Can't sleep either? He asked, not looking up. I shook my head and sat beside him on the couch, the leather creaking beneath my weight. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything, he said, finally turning to face me. Was I really your last resort? Did you take me because you couldn't have your own kids? He turned to face me, his expression serious in the dim light, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. We chose you. Out of all the children we could have adopted, we chose you. Not because we were desperate, but because the moment we saw you, we knew you were our son. But what she said about the fertility treatments was true, he admitted with a sigh. We tried for years. It nearly broke us. But the day we met, you was the day we realized why none of it had worked. Because you were waiting for us. You were always meant to be our son. I felt tears welling up, hot and unexpected. I'm sorry she's doing this to you, after everything you've done for me. He put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close like he used to when I was small. We're not doing this for you. We're doing this with you. We're a family, and families face things together. The next day, I reluctantly returned to campus for an exam I couldn't miss, the weight of responsibility making my shoulders ache. When I got back to my dorm, there was a handwritten note slipped under my door, the paper folded into a tight square. My miracle boy, it read, the handwriting unmistakably hers. I'm sorry about what happened. I wasn't myself. Please meet me at the diner tomorrow at 2. I want to make things right. Just you and me. No parents. I stared at the note, my heart racing so fast I could feel it in my throat. I should have thrown it away. I should have called my parents. Instead, I tucked it into my pocket and tried to study, the words in my textbook swimming before my eyes. That night, I called my cousin Marcus. He was a few years older and worked as a paralegal at a law firm, his analytical mind always finding solutions to problems I couldn't solve. I need to find out more about my birth mother, I explained, pacing the length of my dorm room. Is there any way you can help me? What kind of information are you looking for? He asked, the sound of keyboard clicking in the background. Anything. Family members, previous addresses, criminal history. He was quiet for a moment. The clicking paused. This sounds serious. Are you in trouble? I told him everything. The identity theft, the assault, the restraining order, the note under my door, the words tumbling out in a rush. Jesus, he said when I finished, letting out a low whistle. Yeah, I can help. Give me a couple of days. I didn't tell my parents about the note or my conversation with Marcus. I didn't want them to worry more than they already were, but I also didn't want to meet her alone, the memory of her rage still fresh in my mind. The next day, I drove to the diner but didn't go inside. I watched from my car as she arrived, took a booth by the window, and kept checking her watch, her fingers drumming impatiently on the tabletop. After 30 minutes, she left, looking angry, her movements sharp and jerky as she stalked to her car. That evening, Marcus called. I found something, he said, his voice low and urgent. Your birth mother has a brother named Neil, living about 2 hours north of you. He's the only family member I could locate. Do you have his contact information? I asked, already reaching for a pen. Better, I have his address. He paused, the silence heavy with unspoken concern. Be careful, okay? This woman sounds dangerous. The next day, I drove to Neil's address, the GPS leading me through winding country roads to a small house in a working-class neighborhood, with a well-kept yard and a pickup truck in the driveway. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, working up the courage to knock on the door, rehearsing what I would say. Finally, I did. A man in his 50s answered, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes, the same light green as mine and my birth mother's, sharp and alert, widening slightly as they took in my appearance. Can I help you? He asked, his voice gruff, but not unfriendly. Are you Neil? When he nodded, I continued. My name is, I know who you are, he interrupted, his expression softening like butter in the sun. You look just like her when she was young. He invited me in, and we sat at his kitchen table, the surface worn smooth from years of use. He made coffee that tasted nothing like the stale brew my birth mother had served at the diner, rich and fragrant with a hint of cinnamon. How did you find me? He asked, watching me over the rim of his mug. I explained about Marcus, about everything that had happened, the words flowing easier with this stranger who somehow felt familiar. He sighed heavily, setting down his cup with a soft clink. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I'm not. She's done this before. Done what? I asked, leaning forward. Found families to latch onto, drain them dry, then vanish. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes distant with memories. Usually it's men, boyfriends, husbands. She finds someone with money or stability and convinces them she's in love. But sometimes it's families, people she can manipulate with guilt or obligation. Has she ever targeted a child she gave up before? I asked, the question that had been gnawing at me. He looked surprised, eyebrows shooting up. You're the only one, as far as I know. We talked for hours, the afternoon light shifting across the kitchen floor. He told me about their childhood, about how she'd always been troubled, always looking for shortcuts, how she'd cut him off years ago when he refused to bail her out of debt for the third time. The bridge between them not just burned but obliterated. She used to call it her claiming what's mine, he said, his mouth twisting bitterly, like the world owed her something and she was just collecting. As I was leaving, he handed me a business card, the edges worn as if he'd carried it in his wallet for years. My cell's on the back, call me if you need anything, and be careful. When she feels cornered, she gets desperate. On the drive home, I formulated a plan, the pieces falling into place like a puzzle. It wasn't perfect, but it might be enough to get her out of our lives for good. When I got home, I told my parents everything. The note, meeting Neil, what he'd told me, the ideas churning in my mind. I have an idea, I said, spreading my hands on the kitchen table, but I need your help. My plan was simple, set a trap. I would text her, apologize for missing our meeting, and suggest another one. I'd tell her I'd convinced my parents to help her financially, really help her, not just a few $100s. I'd bring documents, bank information, maybe even a check as a show of good faith, the bait in our carefully constructed snare. It's too dangerous, my mom protested, her face pinched with worry. What if she hurts you again? We'll meet in public, I assured her, trying to sound more confident than I felt. And I won't actually give her anything valuable, just enough to make her think she's getting what she wants. My dad looked thoughtful, stroking his chin where stubble had begun to grow. And then what? Then we wait. Neil said she always wants more. She'll try to come back for the real documents, the real money. And we'll be waiting, my dad finished, a grim smile spreading across his face. We spent the next day preparing. I created fake bank statements showing accounts with substantial balances, the numbers just large enough to be tempting without seeming suspicious. My dad printed dummy checks that looked real but wouldn't actually work. We put together an envelope with just enough real-looking documents to be convincing, a trail of breadcrumbs leading right to our door. I texted her, I'm sorry about the other day. I've been thinking about what you said. Can we meet tomorrow at the diner? 1 p.m.? I have something for you. She responded almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. I knew you'd come around. See you then. The next day, I met her at the diner. She was all smiles, as if she hadn't slapped me across the face a week earlier, as if we were just a mother and son catching up over lunch. I'm so glad you reached out, she said, reaching for my hand across the table. I let her take it, forcing myself not to pull away, her skin cool and dry against mine. I've been so worried about you. I've been thinking a lot, I said, trying to sound sincere, rehearsing the lines we'd practiced. About what you said, about what you've been through. She nodded eagerly, her eyes bright with anticipation. It hasn't been easy. No one understands what it's like to give up a child. I slid the envelope across the table, watching her face carefully. My parents and I talked. We want to help you, really help you. She opened it, her eyes widening as she saw the bank statements, the checks, her fingers trembling slightly as she leafed through the papers. This is so generous. There's more, I said, leaning in conspiratorially. But my parents want to meet with you first, to discuss the details. They have the rest of the documents at home. Of course, she agreed quickly, already calculating. When? Tomorrow night? They're having a dinner party, but they said you could come by after, around 9. She smiled, but there was something calculating in her eyes, a predator sensing prey. I'll be there. That night, we prepared. We moved all the valuable items and important documents to a neighbor's house, leaving just enough to make the house look lived in. We set up additional cameras, making sure every angle was covered, every movement would be recorded, and we called Neil, who drove down to be with us, his truck pulling into our driveway just after sunset. She won't expect to see me, he said, his expression grim. It might throw her off balance. At 8:30 the next night, we turned off most of the lights, making it look like the dinner party was winding down, the house settling into evening quiet. My parents and Neil waited upstairs in my parents' bedroom, where they could monitor the security feeds. I sat in the darkened living room, watching the security camera feed on my laptop, my heart pounding so loud, I was sure it would give me away. At 9:15, a car pulled up outside, the headlights cutting through the darkness before going dark. But she didn't come to the front door. Instead, she circled around to the back of the house, to the kitchen door we'd intentionally left unlocked, the hinges freshly oiled so they wouldn't squeak. I texted my parents. She's here, coming in through the back. I watched on the camera as she entered the kitchen, looking around cautiously, her movements deliberate and practiced. She was wearing gloves, the leather dark against her pale skin. She moved through the house with the confidence of someone who'd been there before, heading straight for my dad's office, where we'd left a drawer slightly ajar, a hint of important-looking papers visible. I slipped upstairs to join my parents and Neil, our footsteps silent on the carpeted stairs. We watched on another laptop as she rifled through my dad's desk, growing increasingly frustrated when she couldn't find what she was looking for, muttering under her breath. Finally, she came upstairs, the floorboards creaking beneath her weight. We could hear her opening doors, checking rooms, the sound of drawers being pulled open and closed. When she reached my parents' bedroom, she went straight to their closet, pushing aside clothes to reveal their safe, her fingers tracing the keypad as if imagining the combination. That's when we stepped into the doorway, all four of us, a united front. She spun around, her face a mask of shock that quickly turned to anger, her hand still outstretched toward the safe. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice high and brittle. "We know what you're doing," I said calmly, the words rehearsed, but no less true. "We have it all on video, the break-ins, the theft, everything." She looked from me to my parents to Neil, her eyes narrowing when she saw her brother, recognition and betrayal flashing across her face. "Neil, what are you doing here?" "Helping family," he replied simply, his arms crossed over his chest. She laughed bitterly, the sound scraping against my ears. "Family? They're not your family. He's not your family." She pointed at me, her finger trembling slightly. "He's mine. I made him. And then you threw him away," my mom said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotion I could see in her eyes. "We're the ones who raised him, who loved him, who were there for every nightmare, every triumph, every ordinary day in between." "What do you want?" my birth mother asked, her voice hard, cornered but still dangerous. "We want you gone," my dad said. "Out of our lives, for good." She looked at the cameras, at our faces, calculating her options like a chess player seeing checkmate looming. "And if I refuse?" I held up my phone, the screen showing the video feed of her breaking in. "Then we take this footage to the police, along with the evidence of identity theft, breaking and entering, assault. You'll go to prison." For a moment, I thought she might lunge at us again. Her body coiled like a spring, but then something in her seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of her like air from a punctured balloon. "Fine," she said, her voice flat. "You win. I'm gone." "It's not about winning," I told her, surprised by the pity I felt. "It's about protecting what matters." Neil stepped forward, his presence solid and reassuring. "I'll make sure she leaves town, for good this time." As they walked out, she turned back one last time, pausing in the doorway. Her eyes, my eyes, met mine, searching for something I couldn't name. There was no remorse there, no love, nothing but cold calculation, and perhaps a flicker of grudging respect. "You're more like me than you think," she said, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I shook my head, certain in a way I hadn't been before. I'm nothing like you. I never will be." After they left, we changed the locks again. We installed a better security system, with motion sensors and direct connection to the police. We changed phone numbers and email addresses. We reported the identity theft, and worked with the credit bureaus to repair the damage, hours spent on hold and filling out forms. And slowly, our lives returned to normal. One afternoon a few weeks later, I sat with my mom on the back porch. She was sipping coffee, and I had a hot chocolate, the same thing she'd made for me on my first night in their home 12 years earlier, topped with whipped cream and cinnamon just the way I liked it. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked suddenly, the question that had been weighing on me. "Adopting me? After everything that happened?" She looked at me, surprised. Her mug paused halfway to her lips. "Regret it? Never. Not for a single second. Even with all the trouble she caused?" My mom set down her coffee and took my hand, her fingers warm and familiar against mine. "Sweetheart, you were never the trouble. You were always the blessing." I squeezed her hand, feeling something settle inside me, a peace I hadn't felt since finding that letter on my 18th birthday, a certainty that had been missing. "I used to think a piece of me was missing," I said, watching a pair of cardinals flit between the trees in our backyard, "that I needed to find her to be whole. But I was wrong. I was already whole. I already had everything I needed." She smiled, tears in her eyes catching the afternoon light. "So did we." I posted the security footage on a private YouTube channel and sent the link to my parents and Marcus, just in case. Neil had promised to make sure his sister left town, but I wasn't taking any chances. 1 month after the confrontation, I came home for the weekend. My parents had invited the extended family over for dinner, a normal, everyday gathering that felt revolutionary after everything we'd been through. The house filled with the scent of my mom's lasagna and the sound of my cousin's laughter. My cousin Marcus pulled me aside before dinner, his expression serious despite the festive atmosphere. "Any more trouble?" he asked quietly, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. I shook my head, helping myself to a handful of chips from the bowl on the counter. Nothing. Maybe Neil really did convince her to stay away. Later, after everyone had left and my parents had gone to bed, I sat alone by the dying embers of the fire in the backyard fire pit. My phone buzzed. A text from Neil. "Check your email." The attachment was a newspaper article from a small town in Nevada. The headline read, "Local woman arrested for fraud and identity theft." There was a mugshot of my birth mother, looking haggard and angry, her hair limp, and her eyes, my eyes, dull with defeat. According to the article, she'd been caught trying to open credit cards in the name of an elderly man she'd been working for as a home health aide. I forwarded the email to my parents with a simple message: "It's over." The next morning, we sat at the kitchen table, reading the article together, the three of us huddled around my dad's tablet. "Should we feel bad?" my mom asked, her brow furrowed with that endless capacity for compassion that had made her such a wonderful mother. "That she's going to prison?" My dad shook his head, his jaw set firmly. She made her choices, over and over again. I stared at the mugshot, searching for any resemblance beyond the superficial. The green eyes, the earlobes. Was there something deeper we shared? Some fundamental flaw that might one day surface? "You're nothing like her," my mom said softly, reading my thoughts with that uncanny maternal intuition. "You never have been." That evening, as we sat down to dinner, my mom set a plate of spaghetti in front of me, the steam rising with the scent of garlic and basil. "Try not to get lost between the kitchen and the table," she said with a wink, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You know you got your birth mother's terrible sense of direction." I stared at her for a second, then burst out laughing. The sound startled out of me. My dad joined in, and soon we were all wiping tears from our eyes, the tension of the past weeks dissolving in our shared mirth. "I've missed those jokes," I admitted when we'd calmed down, realizing how much I'd longed for that easy familiarity, that unique language of family. My mom smiled, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "Me too."